What are early signs of a toxic relationship? When they do something that makes you uncomfortable, and they get mad at you for expressing your discomfort. This is a sign of a narcissist. When someone takes your boundaries personally, it is a huge red flag. This always happened to me when I would call my ex out for downright gawking at other women while he was in public with me. Like, what am I supposed to do? Sit there and look stupid? Nah bro. Plenty of other dudes out there that know how to be respectful. If you express your discomfort and they become overly apologetic, and I mean self-deprecating levels of apologetic to get you to feel bad for them, that's also a red flag. Not all of the time, since they might have an inferiority complex, but something definitely to be wary of. When you don't feel like you can actually speak about your problems since they will take it personally or won't bother listening. Once I was having a moment of insecurity in a relationship, and I told my then boyfriend that I didn't want to talk about it because it was irrational and unfair. He insisted I tell him, and when I did, he lost it on me and said I should have lied to him instead. He held on to that for the rest of our, nearly 2-year-long, relationship. Learn from my mistake. Don't be in a relationship like that. When every argument is your fault and you have to be the one to apologize every time. I apologize for being upset at things that I am justifiably upset at. She refused to ever apologize for the BS she would pull. We had massive fights almost every day and she drove me to the point where I got so stressed out. At one point I reached up and yanked out a chunk of my own hair, and her reaction was to raise her fist like she was about to punch me. She sure as hell started apologizing when I left her. When you realize that you are spending all your time dealing with their issues, and never yours. That might not necessarily mean they are bad or toxic people either. You and them could be totally decent people and be good friends, but the way you fit together just doesn't work well for you. I literally just got out of a friendship where I felt like every time we hung out, I was their therapist. And it was the same issues over and over again. It was exhausting. Long story short, I did her a huge favor, financially, and then I asked for a small favor in return. She lost it on me. I was stunned. I showed my husband all of her texts and asked him if I was reading everything correctly or if I'd done anything to deserve the vitriol. He said, nope. So I calmly told her that I didn't deserve to be talked to like that and our friendship was over. That was a month ago. She hasn't reached out to apologize or anything, and honestly, I don't miss her or the exhausting therapy sessions. I thought I might, but I don't. The relationship doesn't feel good. This is profoundly what I felt early on in my last relationship. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that something was simply off. I brought up this feeling to him numerous times throughout our 6-year relationship and he countered it by saying things like everyone feels like this in a relationship, you just have to work to get past it. I was a coward and a fool for agreeing with him each time. Not surprisingly, our relationship was garbage. It turned me into a mean, spiteful person towards him. If it feels wrong, it is wrong. Never ignore that feeling. Giving you the silent treatment. This was my relationship for a very, very long time. Well, I say was, but honestly it still is. Things might be better, on the surface, but I've lost all contact with all my friends, couldn't wear certain things and lost most of my confidence. I wasn't allowed to chat to people online, even in games, or would get regular silent, withdrawn periods. Now years on. With no one to talk to and small kids, and the possibility my partner might end her life and leave me with absolutely no one. Might as well keep going. Making you choose between them and your family and trying to control you. My wife had only one friend locally. Her friend told her that she had bad vibes about me without even knowing me. I wasn't invited to a lot of stuff because her friend didn't want me involved. Even though she was treating me bad, I said I didn't mind hanging out, but she basically told my wife that she needed to take a break from her. My wife was sad losing that friend but figured she probably wasn't a good friend if she wasn't willing to share her with me. To this day I still feel bad that we couldn't all just be friends, but it really wasn't my fault. Subtly insulting you for their own pleasure. My ex did this consistently. She'd tease me about things she was well aware were touchy of embarrassing to me and get mean if I got hurt. And God forbid I tease her the same way. That went very badly. I later realized it was part of her devaluing me and making sure my self-esteem stayed low enough for her to control me. Also part of her isolation tactics, by alienating me from the people she'd tease me in front of. When she noticed that any time I was getting along with someone else too much around her, she'd either tease or outright insult me to kill our conversation. It's amazing what you will put up with when someone convinces you they're the only person who can stand you. Giving you no space. I love to play video games, always had. This was established before we dated, before we lived together, before we got engaged. On my days off it's always pre-planned with something she wants to do. When I say I just want to relax and play video games, it turned into arguments. She was blaming me and said I don't want to spend time with her. This behavior is a very common symptom of some very deep-seated issues. These types of people deeply rely on others for their attention, and to give them entertainment. They very rarely have hobbies or any source of gratification for themselves, so everything you do is like a direct line to their sense of well-being and self-worth. Do something for yourself and it is seen as threatening their source of emotional sustenance. If they talk about their exes too much, especially if it's in a negative way. I don't have an absolute policy on this. Sometimes an especially crazy ex can be a good story worth a laugh, and I haven't got a problem with occasionally sharing war stories. But there's a huge difference between talking occasionally about the crazy evil ex, and talking about all your exes like they're bad. Ideally, not all of your exes are necessarily bad people. It's possible to have a relationship with someone, fail, and not want to be with them again, and still believe that they're a decent person. If someone is older than maybe 25 or so and all of their exes were crazy, that would seem to imply one of two things. All of their exes really were crazy, ergo they consistently have very poor judgment, low standards, or what have you. Or, not all of their exes were crazy, but they tend to take a super negative view of people they've dated who might have been okay. When they start isolating you from your friends and wanting to know what you've been doing, or where you've been, all the time. Or making you feel bad for not being with them. This is actually a super easy way to slip into a really bad bout of codependency. I had really bad codependency issues with my previous girlfriend, and with my new current girlfriend of 7 years, I was doing great working on self-esteem and being not so clingy and codependent up until this whole pandemic. It sucks to feel like you've regressed, and before I realized, I was already starting to do things I thought I had moved past, constantly needing attention, assuming worst-case scenario whenever she was busy or didn't respond. Currently trying to refocus on myself for a bit and get off her back a little. But I do still feel bad for putting all of that onto her without intending to. Love bombing. A classic emotional abuse tactic, and the abuser often goes hard into it early in the relationship, to get you hooked. Let's say you've been seeing someone for 3 weeks and they surprise you with tickets to an exotic vacation. Or an expensive gift. They'll also usually profess their affection for you often and kind of exaggerated. Lots of no one else has ever made me feel like this kind of stuff. That way you get attached quickly and form positive perceptions of this person, so that when the toxic treatment starts you A, don't leave because you know they're good underneath it, and B, they can weaponize it against you as a guilt trip. That's not to say every fast-paced relationship is emotionally abusive, mind you. Every relationship works at its own speed and some are faster than others. But it's a reason to be cautious. Especially if it's an early relationship for you, toxic people tend to favor inexperienced targets. Don't be afraid to say you're not ready for something, or that it's happening too fast for you to keep up with. In healthy relationships, the other person will understand. Gaslighting. The distortion of reality. It is from the play, later a movie, called Gaslight. In the movie, a serial killer marries a naive woman. He romances her and sweeps her off her feet, dazzles her into falling in love with him, but the real reason he wants to marry her is, he found out there are jewels hidden in the attic of her house. So they marry. He moves in, and at night he turns the gas lamps down low so he can search in the attic, but in order to not be caught, he begins to convince his wife and everyone else that she is crazy. So he tells her she didn't see the gas lamps lower. He tells her no, there was no letter in the desk. You stole that brooch, don't you remember? That's why it's there. Little things to distort her reality until she feels she is going mad. Of course she isn't insane at all. He's lying to her. So in everyday life it could be, of course I'm not seeing her. She is a friend. Of course you didn't see us kissing, you're crazy. Of course you didn't hear me calling her at night, you were dreaming. It's bigger than lying because it's making the person distrust their own senses. Controlling behavior. It can start out as seeming like they are only looking out for you by always having to be with you or asking who is on the phone or hanging right next to you when you use it. Showing signs of being hurt that you were talking to, let's say your best friend, and not talking to or hanging out with them and then getting mad at you for it. I had a friend who would get jealous whenever I hung out with other friends, even though it was always fine if she did the same. She eventually started giving me the silent treatment whenever I spent time with anyone other than her, which I made sure to do often. There was one time she ignored me for an entire month because a mutual friend took me to a concert, and when she finally felt like talking to me again she tried to make me think that I was at fault and did something horrible to her. She really tried her best to keep me from hanging out with anyone else. Unfortunately for her, I didn't care. Running hot and cold. 1 minute being all lovey-dovey, then being cold and distant. Massive red flag. Asking questions about previous relationships in seemingly good faith, then throwing that information back in your face later on. Constantly questioning you about your whereabouts, and implying that you've been up to no good when you've been hanging out with friends or even family. Not really complimenting you unless it's masked in a criticism or insult. Sabotaging your relationships by starting fights or calling your friends a bad influence. Basically, when you have a partner who you can't trust to have your back or best interests in hard times, then it's time for you to move on, period. Don't wait for them to change, they won't. Emotional manipulation. Also, when a person shares too much too fast, trauma bonding is a thing. They share personal stuff to gain trust. Jealousy and controlling behavior. There's tons of sign but can be difficult to spot because you're smitten. If you find yourself allowing things you'd never allow or feel yourself withdrawing, something is definitely up. Just keep in mind that abuse isn't always physical. Not apologizing and not taking responsibility for their actions. Always like constructing a narrative that absolves them of responsibility in any issue. Both of these indicate an unwillingness to admit fault in any way that bruises their ego. On a small level, it's not "sorry I made us late because I lost track of time," it's "well, you should have called me to make sure I had eaten before we got close to the time to leave, and why does the extra half hour matter anyway?" In my experience, this eventually turned into every issue, big or small, being 100% my fault no matter what, plus a dramatic rewriting of history to save her ego after the fact.